Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So certain beneficiaries will not only be receiving one payment next month in May, but they'll actually be receiving double payments next month. So we're going to be covering who is going to be receiving those payments and why. Plus, yesterday the Supreme Court began hearing oral arguments on why presidents should be given immunity as far as criminal acts or other things that they do while in office. So we will be covering part of that as well. But before we go ahead and dive into the main content of today's video, if you wouldn't mind helping me out real quickly by just giving this video a like, that just helps out with the good old YouTube algorithm, and also consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already. Plus, if you would like to receive up to $10,000 in free stocks or $10,000 in free cash, in a pinned comment below, I will be leaving a link to Moomoo. All you have to do is once you click on that link is just sign up for a free account and then deposit at least $100. At that point, Moomoo will be sending you at least 7 free stocks worth all the way up to $10,000. And if you really just have the cash, all you have to do is once you receive the free stocks is just sell them for what they're worth and then transfer the cash value right back to your bank account. Okay, so diving right into our lead story of today's video, and of course, yesterday the Supreme Court began hearing oral arguments on whether or not presidents should be giving immunity for acts that they committed while in office. And they began hearing oral arguments yesterday, and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was asked whether or not he thought that presidents should be given immunity, whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden. And according to The Hill, he actually argued against presidential immunity for criminal prosecution. So according to The Hill, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he doesn't think presidents should be immune from criminal prosecution for their actions in office, as the Supreme Court heard arguments on the issue related to former President Trump. Asked in a Thursday interview on NBC News Meet the Press with Kristen Welker if he believes a president is above criminal prosecution, McConnell deferred to the Supreme Court. He said, quote, "Obviously, I don't think that, but it's not up to me to make that decision. The president clearly needs some kind of immunity or he would be in court all the time." So he went on to say, we'll just see how the Supreme Court deals with it. And then, of course, on Thursday, the Supreme Court heard nearly 3 hours worth of arguments from Trump's lawyers about why he should be immune from criminal prosecution in a case that alleges he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. We'll be going over one of those arguments, kind of a back and forth between Trump's lawyer and one of the members on the Supreme Court. And we'll be playing that video in just a moment. But first, we're going to be going over why certain beneficiaries of Social Security are not only going to be receiving one payment next month in May, but they're actually going to be receiving 2 payments, what that means, and who is going to be receiving those payments. So basically, first off, who's going to be receiving the payments is going to be individuals who are receiving SSI benefits. The second question, why are they receiving 2 payments next month in May? Well, that's because their June payment on June 1st actually ends up being on a weekend. And to be exact, it's a Saturday. So basically, as far as SSI payments go and the rules involved around them, anytime the first of a month, which is when SSI recipients normally receive their payments, falls on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a holiday, they just get that payment 1 business day earlier. So in that case, that day happens to fall on May 31st. So the June payment for SSI recipients ends up falling on May 31st next month. So you will be receiving a payment both on May 1st as well as May 31st. And then whenever June comes around, you won't be receiving a payment in the month of June at all. That's because, once again, your June payment is actually going to be falling on May 31st. So according to AS, why there could be a double SSI payment in May. They say that supplemental security income recipients will receive 2 payments in May. Why? Well, there's a reason that has to do with the payment schedule established by the Social Security Administration. SSI benefits are paid on the first of the month, but when the first falls on a holiday or a weekend, they are paid on the previous working day. While in May, the first lands on a Wednesday, the 1st of June falls on a Saturday, meaning that the June payment will be sent on Friday, the 31st of May. And then, of course, in August and in November, 2 payments will also be received by SSI beneficiaries for the same reason. So basically what I said there, and you can see the payment schedule up there on the screen for individuals receiving SSI. And once again, next month in May, there are going to be 2 payments going out. Also in the month of August, there's going to be payment going on August 1st as well as August 30th. And then finally in November, there's once again going to be 2 payments going out for recipients of SSI. And then to wrap up this video, we are going to be playing a clip, sort of a back and forth here, by one of the Supreme Court justices in Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is grilling one of Trump's lawyers on his argument for immunity. She's saying his argument doesn't make sense at all, but leave your thoughts and comments below about this. Do you believe that presidents should be immune from criminal prosecution? Let's go ahead and play this clip, and I will see you guys in the next video.
Justice Jackson?
So I think I now understand better your position. In your discussions with Justice Kavanaugh, it became clear that you are saying that for the private acts of a president, there's no immunity, but for the official acts of the president, there is immunity. Is that your position?
I agree with that.
All right. So one thing that occurs to me is that this sort of difficult line drawing problem that we're having with all of these hypotheticals, is this a private act or a public act, is being necessitated by that assumption. Because of course, if official acts didn't get absolute immunity, then it wouldn't matter. We wouldn't have to identify which are private and which are public, correct?
That, in fact, is the approach of the D.C. Circuit. There's no determination that needs to be made.
Right, but I'm just making, so to the extent we're worried about, like, how do we figure out whether it's private or public, we have to understand that we're only doing that because of an underlying assumption that the public acts get immunity. So let me explore that assumption. Why is it, as a matter of theory, and I'm hoping you can sort of zoom way out here, that the president would not be required to follow the law when he is performing his official acts? Everyone else, there are lots of folks who have very high-powered jobs, who make a lot of consequential decisions, and they do so against the backdrop of potential criminal prosecution if they should break the law in that capacity. And we understand and we know, as a matter of fact, that the President of the United States has the best lawyers in the world. When he's making a decision, he can consult with pretty much anybody as to whether or not this thing is criminal or not. So why would we have a situation in which we would say that the president should be making official acts without any responsibility for following the law?
I respectfully disagree with that characterization. The president absolutely does have responsibility. He absolutely is required to follow the law in all of his official acts. But the remedy for that is the question: could he be subject to personal vulnerability, sent to prison for making a bad decision after he leaves office?
But other people who have consequential jobs and who are required to follow the law make those determinations against the backdrop of that same kind of risk. So what is it about the president? I mean, I've heard you say it's because the president has to be able to act boldly, make kind of consequential decisions. I mean, sure, but again, there are lots of people who have to make life and death kinds of decisions, and yet they still have to follow the law. And if they don't, they could be sent to prison, et cetera, et cetera. So
I say two things in response to that,
yes.
Both from Fitzgerald. That's the very sort of inference or reasoning that this court rejected in Fitzgerald.
No, but let me just, Fitzgerald was a civil situation in which the president actually was in a different position than other people because of the nature of his job, the high-profile nature, and the fact that he touches so many different things. When you're talking about private civil liability, anybody on the street can sue him. We could see that the president was sort of different than the ordinary person when you say, should he be immune from civil liability from anybody who wants to sue him? But when we're talking about criminal liability, I don't understand how the president stands in any different position with respect to the need to follow the law as he is doing his job than anyone else.
He is required to follow the law. And what Fitzgerald
but he's not
said is
if there's no criminal prosecution. If there's no threat of criminal prosecution, what prevents the president from just doing whatever he wants?
All the structural checks that are identified in Fitzgerald and a whole series of this court's cases that go back to Martin against Mott, for example, impeachment, oversight by Congress, public oversight. There's a long series of them. Fitzgerald directly addresses this in the civil context, and we think that language naturally ports.
I'm not sure that's much of a backstop. And what I'm, I guess, more worried about, you seem to be worried about the president being chilled. I think that we would have a really significant opposite problem if the president wasn't chilled. If someone with those kinds of powers, the most powerful person in the world, with the greatest amount of authority could go into office knowing that there would be no potential penalty for committing crimes. I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
I don't think there's any allegation of that in this case. And what George Washington said is, what Benjamin Franklin said is, we view the prosecution of a chief executive as something that everybody cried out against as unconstitutional. And what George Washington said is, we're worried about factional strife, which will.
No, let me put this worry on the table. If the potential for criminal liability is taken off the table, wouldn't there be a significant risk that future presidents would be emboldened to commit crimes with abandon while they're in office? It's right now the fact that we're having this debate because OLC has said that presidents might be prosecuted. Presidents from the beginning of time have understood that that's a possibility. That might be what has kept this office from turning into the kind of crime center that I'm envisioning. But once we say no criminal liability, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want, I'm worried that we would have a worse problem than the problem of the president feeling constrained to follow the law while he's in office.
I respectfully disagree with that because the regime you've described is the regime we've operated under for 234 years. There has not been an expectation based on 234 years of unbroken political.
All right, let me ask you another question. Let me ask you another question about this clear statement line of questioning. First of all, I didn't see you argue that below. I don't know. I understand that you have that set of in your briefs here, but did you argue before the D.C. Circuit something about a clear statement with respect to statutes?
Yes, in our separately filed motion to dismiss based on statutory grounds, we extensively argued not just this clear statement rule, but a whole panel.
Right, but that's not the question presented in this case. The question presented in this case comes out of your motion for immunity. So to bring in now an argument that you didn't raise below, it seems to me you forfeited it. No?
I believe it's fairly included within the question presented, especially because the court expanded the question presented from what either of the parties submitted.
But not to statutory interpretation. I mean, that argument goes to statutory avoidance, constitutional avoidance, statutory interpretation. You asked for immunity, which is a totally different thing.
I think they're very closely related logically. The question is does immunity exist and to what extent does it? And the argument is immunity at least exists to the extent that it raises a grave constitutional question that triggers the clear statement rule. That's a really tight
logical relationship. But that's totally circular. You use that argument to avoid constitutional questions. You are asking us a constitutional question here. So it doesn't even make sense to talk about clear statement and rule the way that it's come up in the context of an immunity question. But let me ask you this about it. I had one more question. So what is the argument that the President of the United States, who you say is bound by the law, is not on notice that he has to do his job consistent with the law? I mean, to the extent that the clear statement rule comes in at all, it's about the person not being on notice. So I guess I don't understand why Congress in every criminal statute would have to say, and the president is included. I thought that was the sort of background understanding that if they're enacting a generally applicable criminal statute, it applies to the president just like everyone else. So what is the clear statement that would have to be made in this context?
Under Franklin and under Public Citizen, Congress has to speak clearly before it interferes with the president's powers, and we have here an indictment that seeks to criminalize objective conduct that falls within the heartland of core executive authority.
Thank you.